Hi there, and welcome back to the garden. I'm Eleanor. Before we begin, tell me down in the comments, what's your dream garden style? Are you drawn to that crisp, clean, modern look, or does your heart belong to something a little softer, a little wilder, a little more romantic? I ask because today is for every single one of you in that second group, the ones who've always dreamed of a garden that looks like it tumbled straight out of an old English storybook. There is a particular kind of garden magic in the cottage style, that lovely, slightly wild, overflowing abundance where flowers spill over each other, climb up walls, and seem to grow together in the most delightfully unplanned-looking way, even though, I promise you, real skill and real planning go into creating that effortless look. It's a style built on romance rather than rigid order, on soft, billowing shapes rather than crisp geometric lines, and on a generous, layered abundance of flowers rather than careful restraint. So today I'm sharing 10 classic plants that build that romantic cottage garden look, old-fashioned favorites, many of them cherished by gardeners for generations, that bring height, fragrance, climbing beauty, and that lovely tumbling abundance to your front yard. And do stay to the very end, because our last plant is a climbing vine that might just become the star of your whole front entrance. So pour yourself a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and if you love an easy, beautiful, romantic garden, tap that subscribe button. It truly helps this little channel grow. All right, let's build your cottage garden dream. Let's begin with one of the most iconic, unmistakable plants of the cottage garden, Foxglove. Foxglove sends up tall, elegant spires densely covered in dozens of bell-shaped, dangling blooms, most commonly in soft purples and pinks, though whites and pale yellows exist too, each bloom delicately speckled inside like a little painted tapestry. Standing several feet tall, Foxglove brings real height and drama to a bed, the kind of vertical presence that makes a cottage garden feel lush and layered rather than flat. There's something genuinely storybook about a cluster of foxgloves swaying gently above lower, softer plants. It's exactly the romantic silhouette this style is known for. Foxglove is typically a biennial, meaning it grows foliage the first year and blooms spectacularly the second, then often reseeds itself gently to keep the display going in future years, which is part of its old-fashioned, self-perpetuating cottage charm. It thrives in part shade to full sun depending on your climate, and prefers rich, well-drained soil. For your design, plant it toward the back of a bed where its height can rise above your other flowers, or tuck it along the edge of a woodland-adjacent spot for that classic cottage meets forest feeling. My tip? Let a few spent flower spikes go to seed at the end of the season rather than deadheading everything, since Foxglove's gentle self-seeding is exactly how it perpetuates that effortless, established cottage look year after year without you having to replant. One important safety note: all parts of foxglove are toxic if ingested, so do cite it thoughtfully if you have curious pets or small children. Tall, storybook, and quintessentially cottage, foxglove sets the romantic tone. Now let's add another beloved spire of color with number 2. Number 2 brings the most extraordinary jewel-toned blue you'll find in the entire garden, held aloft on towering flower spikes, Delphinium. Few flowers achieve the true, saturated blue that Delphinium delivers so effortlessly: deep cobalt, soft periwinkle, and rich violet blue, often with a contrasting eye at the center of each bloom, packed densely along spikes that can rise 4, 5, even 6 feet tall in the right conditions. That combination of extraordinary color and dramatic height makes Delphinium one of the true showstoppers of a classic English cottage border, the kind of plant that anchors an entire planting scheme and draws every eye toward it. Delphinium loves full sun and rich, fertile, well-drained soil, and it does best in climates with cool summers. In hotter regions, it can be a bit more challenging to keep going long-term, so treat it as a glorious seasonal centerpiece if your summers run very hot, or a reliable returning perennial if your climate suits it. For your design, plant it toward the back of a border for that dramatic vertical anchor, ideally staked or supported, since those tall flower spikes can be caught by wind and toppled under their own glorious weight. My tip: stake young delphinium plants early in the season, before they're in full bloom, using a simple bamboo cane and soft tie. Trying to prop up a mature, top-heavy flowering spike after a storm is far harder than supporting it while it's still growing. Extraordinary blue and dramatic height, delphinium is a true cottage garden showstopper. Now let's add an old-fashioned classic that climbs right up the side of the house with number 3. Number 3 is perhaps the single most nostalgic, old-fashioned plant on this entire list, the kind of flower that instantly conjures grandmother's garden: hollyhock. Hollyhock sends up remarkably tall, sturdy spikes, often reaching 6 feet or more, absolutely lined from top to bottom with large, ruffled, saucer-shaped blooms in the most charming range of colors: soft pinks, deep burgundies, sunny yellows, and pure whites. There's a wonderfully old-world charm to hollyhocks growing up against a wall or fence, exactly the way they've grown in cottage gardens for centuries, their tall spires leaning gently against a sun-warmed surface. Like foxglove, hollyhock is often biennial or short-lived perennial, and it self-seeds generously, meaning once established, it tends to keep reappearing in slightly different spots each year, adding to that wonderfully relaxed, unplanned cottage feeling rather than a rigidly maintained one. It loves full sun and average, well-drained soil, and it genuinely thrives when given the support of a wall or fence to lean against, both practically and visually. For your design, plant it right along the base of your house, a fence, or a garden wall, where its tall spires can rise up dramatically against that backdrop, exactly as tradition intends. My tip: hollyhocks can be prone to a fungal issue called rust, which shows up as orange spots on the lower leaves. Simply strip off and dispose of any affected leaves as you notice them, water at the base rather than overhead, and give the plants good air circulation, and it rarely troubles the overall display. Tall, nostalgic, and leaning beautifully against a wall, hollyhock is cottage gardening at its most classic. Now let's add the ultimate symbol of romance itself with number 4. Number 4 brings us to the ultimate symbol of romance in the entire garden world: climbing roses. There is simply nothing quite like a climbing rose in full bloom, scrambling up an arbor, a trellis, or the front of a cottage-style home, covered in dozens of fragrant, old-fashioned blooms. Whether you choose a classic soft pink, a deep velvety red, or a warm apricot, climbing roses bring an unmatched sense of abundance and old-world elegance, exactly the kind of grown here for 100 years feeling that defines true cottage style. Many varieties offer that heady classic rose fragrance too, which drifts beautifully across a front entrance on a warm afternoon. Climbing roses need something to climb: a trellis, an arbor, a fence, and regular tying or training as they grow, since unlike a true clinging vine, they need a little guidance to follow the structure you've given them. They love full sun, at least 6 hours a day, and rich, well-drained soil. For your design, train one up an arbor over your front walkway for a genuinely magical entrance, or along a fence or the front of the house itself for that classic storybook cottage facade. My tip: choose a repeat blooming variety rather than one that flowers only once in spring, so you get that romantic display continuing through much of the growing season rather than over in a few short weeks. Prune it in late winter, removing dead or crossing canes and lightly shaping the framework you want it to grow into. Fragrant, abundant, and the very definition of romance, climbing roses are an absolute cottage essential. Now let's add a fragrant, old-fashioned climbing annual with number 5. Number 5 brings one of the most beautifully fragrant flowers you can possibly grow, climbing delicately wherever you give it the chance: sweet peas. Sweet peas produce delicate, ruffled, butterfly-like blooms in the softest pastel shades: pinks, lavenders, whites, and soft reds, climbing gracefully via curling tendrils up any support you provide. And the fragrance is truly extraordinary. Sweetly perfumed, almost old-fashioned in the very best way. Exactly the scent so many gardeners associate with their grandmother's garden. A single vase of freshly cut sweet peas can perfume an entire room, and growing them right by your front entrance means that fragrance greets every visitor before they've even reached the door. They're an easy annual to grow from seed, loving cool weather in spring and early summer especially. In hot climates, they tend to fade once real summer heat arrives, so think of them as your glorious spring into early summer performer. For your design, give them a simple trellis, obelisk, or netting to climb near your front entrance, where both the delicate blooms and that wonderful fragrance can be fully enjoyed up close. My tip: cut the flowers regularly and generously. Sweet peas are one of those wonderful plants where more cutting genuinely means more blooming, since removing the flowers before they set seed encourages the plant to keep producing more. The more bouquets you cut for your kitchen table, the longer and more generously they'll bloom. Fragrant, delicate, and endlessly giving when cut, sweet peas are a cottage garden treasure. Now let's add a charming, fragrant edging classic with number 6. Number 6 brings a smaller-scale, wonderfully fragrant classic that's been beloved in cottage gardens for centuries: cottage pinks, or Dianthus. These charming, low-growing perennials form neat mounds of silvery blue grass-like foliage, topped from late spring into summer with abundant, fringed, star-shaped flowers, most often in shades of pink, though white and red varieties exist too. And true to their old-fashioned reputation, many varieties carry a delightful clove-like fragrance that adds another wonderful sensory layer to the garden, the very trait that gives them their common name. Being lower-growing and neat, cottage pinks bring exactly the right sense of scale contrast against our taller plants like Foxglove, Delphinium, and Hollyhock. That layering of heights from low-edging plants right up to towering spires is really the heart of the classic cottage border look. They love full sun and, importantly, excellent drainage. Much like our drought-tolerant favorites, cottage pinks dislike wet, soggy soil and thrive on being left a little lean and dry. For your design, use them as a fragrant, flowering edge along the front of a bed or walkway, exactly where their low, silvery foliage and clove-scented blooms can be appreciated up close. My tip: shear the plants back lightly after their main flush of blooms fades, and you'll often coax out a smaller second flush later in the season, along with keeping the silvery foliage mound neat and tidy through the rest of the year. Fragrant, charming, and perfectly scaled for the front of a border, cottage pinks add old-world detail. Now let's add another airy, old-fashioned spire with number 7. Number 7 is often called the annual cousin of our earlier Delphinium, and it brings that same wonderful vertical, jewel-toned charm in an easier, more casual package: Larkspur. Larkspur sends up airy, elegant spikes of delicate spurred flowers in gorgeous shades of blue, purple, pink, and white, with a softer, slightly more relaxed and informal habit than its grander Delphinium cousin. That informality is actually part of its cottage garden charm. Larkspur tends to weave itself naturally among other plants, self-seeding gently and popping up in slightly different spots each year, contributing to that lovely, unplanned, effortless abundance that defines the style. Being an easy annual, it's wonderfully simple to grow from seed, loving cool spring weather and full sun, and it's remarkably low maintenance compared to some of our more demanding cottage classics. For your design, scatter it through a bed to fill gaps between your other cottage flowers, letting it weave naturally among foxglove, roses, and cottage pinks for that lovely, layered, slightly wild effect. My tip: sow the seeds directly in fall or very early spring, since Larkspur actually prefers a period of cool weather to germinate well. Starting it too late in warm soil often gives disappointing results. And once you have it established, let a few plants go to seed each year to keep that lovely self-sowing cycle going. Airy, jewel-toned, and delightfully self-sowing, Larkspur adds effortless cottage charm. Now let's bring in some soft, cloud-like informal color with number 8. Number 8 brings a light, airy, almost dreamlike quality to the cottage border, and it's remarkably easy to grow: Cosmos. Cosmos produces delicate daisy-like flowers, most beloved in soft pinks and whites, though vivid oranges and deep magentas exist too, held on tall, slender stems above finely feathery, almost fern-like foliage. That fine, airy foliage and those delicate blooms swaying on thin stems give Cosmos a genuinely soft, cloud-like presence in a bed, the perfect informal counterpoint to some of our bolder, more structured cottage plants. It's one of the easiest annuals there is to grow from seed, blooming generously from summer right through to frost with very little fuss, and it actually prefers somewhat poor, lean soil. Rich soil tends to produce lush foliage at the expense of flowers, so resist the urge to over-fertilize. For your design, let it weave loosely through the middle of a border, where its airy, see-through quality allows the plants behind it to still be glimpsed, adding real depth and layering rather than blocking the view. My tip: deadhead the spent blooms regularly to keep the flowers coming all season. And like Larkspur, let a few go to seed at the end of the year for that lovely returning cottage garden self-sufficiency. Soft, airy, and effortlessly abundant, Cosmos brings dreamlike movement to the border. Now let's add a plant valued entirely for its charming, dew-catching foliage with number 9. Number 9 is a quiet, beloved cottage garden classic, valued less for flashy flowers and more for its extraordinarily charming foliage. Lady's Mantle. This lovely perennial forms soft, rounded mounds of scalloped, chartreuse green leaves with a gentle, velvety texture. And here's the truly magical part, the detail that has enchanted gardeners for generations. Those leaves have a natural water-repelling quality, so after rain or morning dew, each leaf holds a perfect glistening bead of water right at its center, like a tiny jewel. It's one of those small, quiet garden details that feels like genuine magic when you first notice it. In early summer, it also sends up airy sprays of tiny, chartreuse yellow flowers that add a soft, frothy texture at the front of a border. Beyond its charm, Lady's Mantle is a wonderful workhorse plant, filling gaps between boulder flowers with that lovely soft green foliage and helping to visually tie a busy, colorful cottage border together into a cohesive whole. It loves part sun to part shade and average, well-drained soil, and it's remarkably low maintenance, returning reliably year after year. For your design, use it along the front edge of a border, where those dew-catching leaves can be appreciated up close, or tucked between bolder flowering plants to give the eye a soft, restful place to land. My tip: if the foliage looks tired or tattered by midsummer, simply shear the whole plant back. It responds beautifully with fresh, new leaves within just a couple of weeks, ready to catch the dew all over again. Charming, magical, and quietly essential, Lady's Mantle ties the whole cottage border together. Now, for our 10th and final plant, the climbing star I promised you at the start. Here it is. And here it is, number 10, the climbing vine I promised you, and it might just become the true star of your front entrance, Clematis. Clematis produces the most extraordinary, large, star-shaped or bell-shaped blooms in colors ranging from deep royal purples and rich burgundies to soft pinks, pure whites, and cheerful blues, climbing gracefully via twining leaf stems up a trellis, arbor, or fence. There's an old beloved gardening saying about Clematis: feet in the shade, face in the sun, describing exactly what it wants. Cool, shaded roots, ideally with a bit of mulch or a low plant shading the base, and full sun reaching up to where those gorgeous flowers open. Paired with a climbing rose on the very same arbor or trellis, Clematis creates one of the most classic, breathtaking combinations in all of cottage gardening. The two vines twining together, blooming in complementary colors, is a genuinely show-stopping front entrance feature that visitors will remember. It loves rich, well-drained soil, and different varieties bloom at different times of year, so with a little planning, you can actually have Clematis in bloom from spring right through fall. For your design, train it up the same structure as a climbing rose for that classic combination, or give it its own trellis or arbor near the entrance where its large, dramatic blooms become an immediate focal point. My tip: Clematis pruning depends on which type you have, since some bloom on old wood and some on new. When in doubt, simply prune lightly right after flowering rather than in a big seasonal chop, and keep those roots shaded and cool with a layer of mulch or a low companion plant at the base. Dramatic, romantic, and the perfect partner for a climbing rose, Clematis is the show-stopping finish. Now let's bring it all together. And there you have it, 10 classic plants for building your own romantic cottage garden, from the towering spires of Foxglove and Delphinium all the way to that show-stopping Clematis climbing your front entrance. Plant even a handful of these together, and I promise you, your front yard will start to take on that lovely, storybook, effortlessly abundant feeling that makes the cottage style so beloved. Here's the thought I'd love to leave you with. Cottage gardening isn't about perfection or rigid control. It's about layers, about fragrance, about letting plants lean into each other and self-sow a little wildly. Give yourself permission to let it be a touch imperfect, and you'll find the romance in it. So tell me down in the comments, what garden style did you tell me you loved at the very start? And which of these 10 cottage classics are you most excited to plant? Share it with your growing zone, and let's build your dream cottage garden together. And do go say a warm hello to a fellow romantic gardener down there in the comments. This little community only gets lovelier with every style we explore together. I've got more wonderful ideas coming your way soon, so make sure you're subscribed with that bell turned on so you never miss a video. Until next time, this is Eleanor. Keep your hands in the soil and your heart in the garden. Take care now. Bye-bye.